I bet veteran Blake Shapen starts at quarterback versus Missouri. But you know what? A real betting man would parlay that with Kamario Taylor finishing it.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And surprisingly, Bo Prabula has gotten at least a slight upgrade this week on the injury report. Speaking of upgrades, well, tight end Brett Norfleet expected to make his return on Saturday. Also, I'll get the latest coaching rumor and innuendo and what it all has to do with Eli Drinkwitz a little bit later in the show. But you know what? I want to start by talking about the quarterback situation for Missouri's opponent tomorrow. That's, of course, the Mississippi State Bulldogs. And Blake Shapen, I've been talking about the injury report here, teasing it anyway. Well, he's been upgraded to a probable in the latest injury report for the Bulldogs. That makes me think that the veteran Shapen is probably going to start, although that honestly could be sleight of hand on Mississippi State's part. As Missouri saw against Texas A&M last season, well, you don't want to make too many assumptions at the quarterback position. Although Jeff Lebby did say, that's the Mississippi State head coach, he was fairly clear in saying that if Shapen were truly healthy, he was knocked out of the game against Georgia last week, that he would be a Mississippi State starter. The only thing is, well, number one, Shapen being upgraded to probable makes me think he is truly healthy. The only thing is he didn't necessarily say he's going to finish the game, because like the game last week, well, Kamario Taylor could possibly come in and be a real spark off the bench for Mississippi State. Taylor is at least in the internet recruiting era, he's the highest rated quarterback to ever sign with Mississippi State. And again, was a real spark off the bench last week, scored 3 touchdowns, all with his legs against Georgia last week. I mean, he's a real explosive player, had a 23-yard rush, also had a 57-yard pass to go along with those 3 rushing scores. So while Taylor has probably mostly thought of as a runner and a scrambler at this point, at 6'4", 230 pounds, a top 10 quarterback nationally out of high school this season, just like Matt Zollers, by the way. So that could potentially be an interesting offer. Speaking of Georgia, he had an offer from Georgia, but this young man went with the home state, Mississippi State Bulldogs, out of Macon, Georgia. So I just think at this point in the season, if you're Mississippi State, you kind of want to, hey, do right by your veteran, start him in the ball game. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to finish the game with him. And I think if you're the Bulldogs, especially if you fall down a little bit early, things aren't clicking offensively, you just have every reason in the world to see a little bit more what you have in Kamario Taylor, especially after last week against Georgia, where he really looked like something. He very much reminds me of Lenore Sellers a little bit as a freshman, just a kid with real big measurables, a strong arm. Obviously, he's very green, too, being a true freshman, but just like Matt Zollers is. So not necessarily the move you make if you're 100% going for a bowl game. Hey, Stephen Willis likes to say that there's nothing more dangerous than a 5-win Mississippi State team heading into the Egg Bowl, desperate for bowl eligibility. So we'll see how desperate Mississippi State is in this particular game. But if I'm Jeff Lebby, I've got to see what I have in Kamario Taylor down the stretch of the season. And really beyond just the bigger picture for Mississippi State, I think for this week, I think Taylor brings an element of unpredictability that actually is a little bit scary as a Missouri fan. I will say, though, Missouri's done a pretty darn good job of reining in rushing and scrambling type of quarterbacks this season so far. So that's certainly a thing in their favor, but it just seems like with plenty of idea of what exactly Shapen is, well, you know what? Mississippi State may need that element of unpredictability, because I have to say, I really think that I'm not sure what to make of the line in this game. Mizzou by 7.5 last I checked, maybe gone back and forth between 7 and 7.5. Missouri the favorite there. It's the ultimate stay away for me. Just not sure I trust this Missouri offense to cover anything of that magnitude right now. A touchdown or even more, that's just too much for this podcaster. However, the total of 51, now that's something that I just see going under quite simply. I don't see both of these offenses putting it together this week. Missouri's offense, there's definitely a better case for it to be put together this week. Mississippi State with one of the worst defenses in the SEC, although I wouldn't say it's one of the worst defenses in the country or anything like that. Always something to keep in mind. Certainly, I think Arkansas has a worse defense than Mississippi State, but other than that, yeah, they're probably down in the dregs, down in the basement, that's for sure, in that particular category. By the way, I did mention that per Pete Thamel, Brett Norfleet is expected to play in this ball game. Surprise! That's obviously good news for Missouri. We'll just see how much of a load Norfleet is actually able to play in this one, how many snaps, of course. And secondarily, Bo Prabula, who I do not expect to see tomorrow, but just the fact that he was upgraded to doubtful, well, it does speak to the fact that his ankle dislocation was fairly unusual and that it apparently popped out clean, for lack of a better term, with no extensive damage to any ligaments or other bones or anything like that. So it sounds like Prabula's recovery, at least, is going about as well as you could expect, and I wouldn't completely rule out him playing in a game or two the rest of this season, especially when you include the bowl game. That does seem like a genuine possibility at this point. By the way, 6:45 kickoff tomorrow, SEC Network. Mizzou legend Tom Hart on the call with Jordan Rogers and Cole Kubelik. I have to say, that's my favorite announcing team, maybe in all of college football right now. And that's biased towards Tom Hart, of course, but I think Jordan Rogers and Cole Kubelik do just a tremendous job. So looking forward to that if you can't make it out to a Faurot Field tomorrow. And folks, thanks as always for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen. You know what, for your second listen, I think Locked On Penn State, Locked On Nittany Lions, yes, Locked On Nittany Lions right now has become basically a must-listen podcast right now for Missouri fans who really want to be in the know. I think at this point, Penn State is the biggest threat if Eli Drinkwitz hypothetically were to leave. And also, this may be his biggest point of leverage as well. And if you don't want to actually, listen to every episode of Locked On Penn State, at least go follow Zach Seyko, by the way. That's Seyko, the host of Locked On Nittany Lions. He recently put out on X, I would like to point out again that Kirk Cignetti of Indiana and Matt Rule and Nebraska, they were the only ones to move quickly to secure long-term extensions. Very interesting that not a single other prominent school and its coach have done the same thing through this carousel. So what's the holdup unless ... big eyes emoji. Oh man, he hit us with the big eyes emoji. You know that's going to get the sweet, sweet impressions. But let's get more into the Penn State job, the Auburn job, LSU, Florida. What's the latest dirt, as it were? Let's find out here in just a little bit. But first, it's almost the weekend, and it's time to look back and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving money every time you order. These players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down. And for my player, I'm going with Chris McClellan, mostly because of what he's done his entire career here at Missouri. The guy just comes through each and every week. No hesitation, no delay. And if you've been watching week after week, this performance, it's just not a fluke. The guy shows up every week. And well, hopefully he gets his rock tomorrow after Missouri beats Mississippi State. And just like Chris delivered for the Tigers, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays. With DoorDash Streaks, you save every Saturday you order. Stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through November 18th. So my colleague over at Locked On Nittany Lions, Zach Sako, he's definitely right about one thing. Kirk Cignetti and Matt Rule signing long-term extensions, that's an obvious signal that those guys are being taken off the table. But if Zach is referring to Eli Drinkwitz, and he may well be, not just Eli, but of course Lane Kiffin hasn't come out and signed an extension publicly or anything like that either, for example. Well, I would just point out to Zach, just as another variable here, well, Eli Drinkwitz did sign an extension after this past offseason. So the rush to get something done, as it were, to jump his salary up a level, well, Drinkwitz is already there. He's already in the top 10. He's making, I believe, $9.25 million to be exact. I think maybe I've rounded up to $10 million before. So sorry about that. I should have rounded down to 9, perhaps. The number that's important, he's tied for 10th. With the aforementioned Lane Kiffin and a few other coaches in the country. That may have shifted a little bit here in light of Kirk Cignetti's extension, for example. The point is, I don't think Eli Drinkwitz's base salary is really the sticking point here with Drinkwitz, if indeed there is one, if that's what we're assuming here, if there is a holdup, as Zach put it. I don't necessarily know that in Drinkwitz's case, if he comes back to Missouri, there's necessarily going to be some announcement of, hey, there's a big extension or something like that. I don't necessarily know that that's going to be the case. It may well happen. I just don't know that that's necessary here. I think Drinkwitz, what he wants, this is my assumption here, I'm just trying to crawl into his cranium, I think he just wants more assurances that, yes, Missouri's still going to remain competitive in NIL. And as long as that's the case, recruiting. As long as that's the case, I think he'll remain here. And as far as looking at the rest of the landscape, well, beyond Penn State, I kind of, I've pointed out that it does seem like at this point, with Kirk Cignetti off the table, with Mike Elko seeming incredibly unlikely, of course, I just think Drinkwitz is sort of the obvious guy now that a lot of Penn State people are looking at. And while I think that he's an understandable name for Penn State people to look at, I just don't think it's going to happen at this point. It could, but I just don't think that it will, if I'm a betting man. Sort of same thing with Auburn, especially with the weird history between, well, Eli Drinkwitz and some of his former colleagues and Auburn. I don't know that I'm necessarily seeing that there. Both Brian Harsin and Gus Malzahn had strange endings there. Drinkwitz is close, I believe, with both of those guys. And plus, the signs seem to be pointing John Sumrall, the coach at Tulane, being the leading candidate at Auburn right now. Obviously, the Florida Gators really want Lane Kiffin. I think that's the most obvious thing in the world. The question is, will Lane go there or not? And if the Gators, well, if they can't lure Lane, then who? Then maybe the Drinkwitz talk starts to pick up a little bit, and you have another bit of leverage for Eli at the very least, or at the very worst, for a Missouri fan's perspective, another team that could potentially lure Drinkwitz away. As for LSU, at the beginning of this whole process, I think a lot of people, including myself, thought that would be an incredibly attractive job for Drinkwitz or anybody else. But I have to say, after the total weirdness with Brian Kelly and everything else, I just can't imagine Eli wanting to go somewhere that doesn't honor its contracts, by the way. They're trying to say Kelly wasn't fired based on the weirdest technicality of all time. I suppose LSU is such a draw with their recruiting base, their fan base. They could be an exception. But I'm just not so sure that the LSU Tigers, because of the last few weeks, have kind of exposed a lot of not so great things behind the scene. And I'm not so sure that that team necessarily gets the pick of the litter and some shiny coach that they were necessarily expecting. And that example, by the way, if regardless, you've got Auburn, LSU, Penn State, Florida. You've got 4 major programs that have won multiple national championships. One way or the other, at least one, if not 2, maybe even 3 of these teams, heck, all of them, could go through this cycle going, wow, I'm kind of disappointed with where this ended up. If it's anybody but Lane Kiffin, I think a lot of Florida fans are going to be disappointed. A lot of them have already decided that they don't like Eli Drinkwitz. They remember the Star Wars bit. They haven't forgotten that stuff. And while some fans obviously don't care, there's some that genuinely just do not like Eli Drinkwitz. I think there's a significant enough of those Florida fans that really matters. That's not something that's really happened with Penn State. Obviously, the Tigers and the Nittany Lions have not played, so there's no actual familiarity. A lot of familiarity between the Missouri Tiger and the Missouri Tigers and the Florida Gators, which has apparently created a decent amount of contempt for Eli Drinkwitz in this particular case. And by the way, I mentioned Drinkwitz talking about how the last step, going from good to great, is obviously so difficult, and that, hey, fans would be wise not to get caught up in the playoff or bust mentality. Well, just to point out the insanity of a lot of those LSU fans, I noticed a lot of them saying, well, scratch Eli Drinkwitz off the list, because if he thinks it's not playoff or bust, then we don't need him, that type of thing. I noticed, seriously, a lot of LSU fans, even some Auburn and Florida fans, took that as loser talk. Well, I took it more as manipulation on Drinkwitz's part, to be honest with you, and that's where it's probably wise as a fan and as an observer of the coaching carousel, especially when it comes to Eli Drinkwitz, don't take absolutely everything he says literally. What is he actually trying to get across here? That's a wise thing to look at. And, of course, tomorrow is senior day for the Tigers. So let's talk about the most important seniors that Missouri is losing and will need to replace on the roster. Let's talk about that here in a little bit. But first, the NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the tip-off or you just want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Just hang in there, Missouri people. December 1st is coming. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So a long list of names for the Missouri seniors this season, and I don't want to list them all just out of, well, that's not great podcasting, let's be real. But I will list the guys who, and break down the ones who played a ton this season, huge contributors that Missouri is definitely going to have to replace one way or the other, either through the portal or they're with younger guys already on the roster. Kevin Coleman, Dalen Carnell, Jalen Catalon, Stephen Hall, Khalil Jacobs, Chris McClellan, Logan Muckey on special teams, Tristan Newsom, Drayden Norwood, Toriano Pride, Connor Tolliston, Keegan Tross, Sterling Webb, Connor Wesselman, and Zion Young. So you're looking at your number one wide receiver, your star safety, a rotational safety in Catalon, 2 corners who played a lot this season, 2 offensive linemen, your center and your right tackle, 3 starting defensive linemen, 2 linebackers in the rotation, and also your starting punter as well. So obviously Missouri with plenty to replace. And by the way, I will say something. Let me clean something up from the fake punt discussion. I believe I said Missouri had not scored at that point. Somebody corrected me and said, yes, it was 21-7 at that point. That doesn't really change my overall point, which is that I was saying, hey, I understand Eli Drinkwitz's logic there, even if I didn't necessarily even if I didn't necessarily love the call, I do understand the logic that Missouri's offense had been, well, pretty much inept in that game. Yeah, I said, yes, they hadn't scored yet. That was wrong. They had scored a touchdown. So they were still down 21-7. To me, Missouri in a bit of desperation mode there. Taking a gamble, that's all I was saying. I'm not saying I loved the call. Certainly hated the result. Every Tiger fan did, and everyone associated with Missouri hated the result. That's not in question. The point here is, did I understand the idea of taking a gamble in that situation? Yeah, I still do. And by the way, that much ballyhooed Missouri basketball recruiting class is now official. Jason Crow Jr. has signed. Aiden Chronister has signed. Tony Bryant as well. So Missouri off to a fantastic start. And, well, even though it's the early signing period, this is probably it. Everyone seems to assume. Unless, who knows? Obviously, things can change. Missouri has plenty of spaces available and flexibility if, say, there's a coaching change. Somebody gets fired and a prominent high school guy then comes on the market. Well, I could see Missouri making a move, but right now, just if you follow high school recruiting, it seems like once Tristan Reed made his decision to go to, Mississippi State. Hey, another Mississippi State point here made today, but the Link Academy product decided to commit there, and it really seems like Missouri will focus on the portal from that point on. Again, the Tigers, once again, though, they can be flexible. That's the good thing. And I'll just say this. If you're a guy who has some defensive upside and maybe needs to figure out the offensive side of the ball, which I think Tony Bryant is in a major, major way, please come to Missouri, because I promise you Dennis Gates and his staff can figure out offense. We just need to figure out defense at a certain point for this program to go from the basketball program to take its final step from good to great in the Gates era. I think Gates is smart enough to realize this, by the way, but I just want to emphasize all of it for you, my beautiful, beautiful podcasting listeners. And I genuinely mean that, by the way. That's not just me being sarcastic, of course. Thank you all for listening to this show. And by the way, thanks for helping making Locked On the #1 sports podcasting network out there. Yeah, you heard me. We're saying it because it's true. And until next time, and I will see you all Sunday morning for a recap of this Missouri-Mississippi State ball game. So I'll see you then right here on Locked On Mizzou.